On January 23, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The media celebrated it. Pro-crypto policy, American innovation, leadership in digital assets. Finally, a government that understands Bitcoin. The price spiked, crypto Twitter went crazy, everyone called it bullish, everyone except the people who actually read the order. Because if you read the language, if you study the legal framework, if you understand what strategic reserves actually mean in government policy, you realize this isn't what they're telling you. This isn't pro-crypto. This is the setup for something else entirely. Something that happened before. In 1933, when the government used almost identical language to confiscate gold from American citizens, revalue it, and erase 40% of the national debt overnight. They called that one a strategic national asset too. They said it was essential to economic stability too. They gave the Treasury authority to acquire and hold too, and then they made it illegal to own gold for 41 years. Executive Order 6102, the greatest wealth confiscation in American history, exposed only after it was too late for anyone to do anything about it. I'm going to show you exactly what Trump's Bitcoin executive order actually says. Line by line, the specific language that mirrors 1933, the legal authorities it grants that the media isn't talking about, the framework it creates for mandatory acquisition, and most importantly, the timeline for what comes next. Because this order isn't the end, it's the beginning. The first step in a multi-phase strategy to position the government to confiscate and revalue Bitcoin exactly the way Roosevelt confiscated and revalued gold. And when they execute that strategy, when they announce the official price, when they make compliance mandatory, you'll either be positioned correctly or you'll lose everything. This video will show you which side you need to be on. Let me start with what the executive order actually says, because most people haven't read it. They've read headlines, they've read tweets, they've read summaries from crypto influencers who are excited about number going up. But the actual language tells a different story. The order is titled, Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. Sounds positive. Sounds like innovation and competitiveness. But titles are marketing. The substance is in the details. Section 1 establishes policy. It states that the United States government will position itself as a leader in digital asset markets. It declares digital assets vital to American economic security. It establishes that the federal government will acquire, hold, and manage digital assets as strategic reserves. Read that again. The federal government will acquire digital assets as strategic reserves. This isn't about letting you own Bitcoin. This is about the government owning Bitcoin, acquiring it, building a reserve, and managing it the way they manage the Strategic Petroleum Reserve or gold reserves in Fort Knox. Section 2 grants authority. It directs the Treasury Department to develop frameworks for digital asset acquisition. It authorizes the Treasury to hold Bitcoin and other digital assets on behalf of the United States. It directs the creation of custody solutions, valuation methodologies, and accounting standards for government-held digital assets. This is infrastructure. They're building the machinery to hold massive amounts of Bitcoin at government scale. You don't build this infrastructure for a small symbolic position. You build it when you're planning to acquire billions or trillions of dollars worth. And most critically, Section 3 addresses acquisition methods. The order authorizes acquisition through multiple channels. Seizure from criminal enterprises, which they're already doing. They hold over 210,000 Bitcoin from Silk Road, Bitfinex, and other seizures. Acceptance as payment for fines, penalties, and settlements. This is new. Government agencies can now accept Bitcoin as payment and retain it for the reserve and purchase through market operations or strategic transactions. That means buying. But here's what the order doesn't say. It doesn't set limits. It doesn't cap how much they can acquire. Now let me show you why this language matters. By comparing it to Executive Order 6102 from 1933, Roosevelt's order was titled Forbidding the Hoarding of Gold Coin, Gold Bullion, and Gold Certificates. Different title. But the substance was remarkably similar. That order declared gold a strategic asset essential to national economic stability. Trump's order declares Bitcoin a strategic asset vital to national security. Same framing. That order granted the Treasury authority to acquire and hold gold on behalf of the United States. Trump's order grants the Treasury authority to acquire and hold digital assets on behalf of the United States. Same authority. That order required delivery of gold to Federal Reserve banks. Trump's order doesn't require delivery yet, but it creates the legal framework for mandatory acquisition later. That order established penalties for non-compliance. 10 years in prison. $10,000 fine. Trump's order doesn't establish penalties yet, but the authority exists to add them through subsequent regulation or legislation. The pattern is identical. Declare the asset strategic. Grant acquisition authority. Build the infrastructure. Then make it mandatory. Roosevelt did steps 1 through 3 in 1933. Step 4 came in 1934 with the Gold Reserve Act. Trump just did steps 1 through 3. Step 4 is coming. Let me address the obvious question. Why would the government want to confiscate Bitcoin, the same reason they confiscated gold? To revalue it and erase debt. The United States government owes $37 trillion. The debt-to-GDP ratio is 132%. Annual interest payments are $1.2 trillion and rising. By 2027, interest will consume over $2 trillion annually if rates stay elevated. This debt cannot be repaid through normal means. You cannot tax enough. You cannot cut spending enough. You cannot grow fast enough. The math doesn't work. There is only one historical solution that works: currency devaluation through asset revaluation. Here's how it worked in 1933. The government confiscated gold at $20.67 per ounce. Then they revalued it to $35, a 69% increase. This accomplished two things. First, it created value on the government's balance sheet. Their gold reserves went from $4 billion to $6.8 billion overnight. Second, it devalued the dollar relative to gold, which inflated away the real value of dollar-denominated debt. The government owed the same nominal amount, but paid in dollars worth 40% less. They erased 40% of the debt burden through accounting manipulation and currency debasement. And they did it legally because they controlled the gold and set the price. Now apply this to Bitcoin. The government acquires 1 million Bitcoin over the next 3 years. That's the target in Senator Cynthia Lummis's Bitcoin Act, which aligns with the executive order. At current prices around $100,000, 1 million Bitcoin costs $100 billion. But they won't pay market price. They'll acquire through seizures, which cost nothing, through fines and settlements, which generate revenue, through below-market mandatory sales if they implement confiscation. Let's say their average cost is $60,000 per Bitcoin. That's $60 billion total investment. Now they hold 1 million Bitcoin, then they revalue. They announced that for purposes of the US balance sheet, Bitcoin is valued at $1 million per coin. Why 1 million? Because that's the number that makes the math work. At 1 million per coin, 1 million Bitcoin equals $1 trillion in assets. Combined with gold revaluation, which they'll likely do simultaneously, the government suddenly has 5 to 7 trillion in hard asset value on the balance sheet. Assets that offset debt. Assets that back the dollar. This is marketed as returning to sound money. Finally, fiscal responsibility. The dollar backed by Bitcoin and gold, hard assets. The gold bugs love it. The Bitcoin maximalists love it. Everyone celebrates. Except here's what actually happens. When the government revalues Bitcoin to 1 million, the market follows. If the largest holder in the world says Bitcoin is worth 1 million, the market reprices. Bitcoin goes from $100,000 to $300,000 to $500,000 to $800,000 over 12 to 18 months. And as Bitcoin rises tenfold, what happens to the dollar? It collapses. Because if Bitcoin goes from $100,000 to $1 million, that's not Bitcoin going up. That's the dollar going down, 90% down. A 90% collapse in the dollar's purchasing power shows up everywhere. Food prices multiply by 5. Energy prices multiply by 5. Housing costs explode. Everything denominated in dollars becomes worth 90% less in real terms, including government debt. The $37 trillion in debt is still $37 trillion nominally, but in real terms, adjusted for the devaluation, it's worth $3.7 trillion. They erase 90% of the debt burden, not by paying it, by devaluing the currency it's denominated in. This is the plan. This is what the executive order enables. And almost nobody understands it because they're too busy celebrating that the government is pro-Bitcoin. Now let me show you the specific mechanisms in the executive order that make this possible. First, the order establishes a working group on digital asset markets. This group includes the Treasury Secretary, the Commerce Secretary, the Attorney General, and the heads of multiple other agencies. This is not a study group. This is an implementation group. And when you bring together Treasury, Justice, and Commerce, you're building cross-agency coordination for major policy execution. Treasury handles acquisition and custody. Justice handles seizure and enforcement. Commerce handles market impact and industry coordination. This is the bureaucratic machinery for a massive operation. Second, the order directs the creation of valuation methodologies. This sounds technical and boring. It's actually critical. Right now, Bitcoin is valued at market price, whatever buyers and sellers agree to on exchanges. But the order establishes government authority to create official valuation methodologies. This means the government can declare an official price separate from market price, just like they did with gold. In 1933, the market price for gold was higher than the official price of 2067. Let me show you who wins and who loses so you understand the stakes. Winners. The government. They erase $20 to $30 trillion in real debt burden through devaluation. Politicians who avoid the impossible choice between cutting spending and raising taxes, they just devalue instead. Early holders who don't comply with confiscation. If you hold Bitcoin through self-custody that the government doesn't know about,